Okay, pause the doom scrolling for 1 second, because what just happened to Donald Trump is on a different level. In a single emergency move, a federal court just froze his empire. Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, the golf courses, the business bank accounts, locked down nationwide. This is the kind of financial nuclear option you usually see in organized crime or money laundering cases, not a former president who ran on power, success, and art of the deal. Tonight, we're talking chaos, collapse, and what this ruling exposes about corruption, democracy, and Trump's political future. Stay right here. It's worse than you think.
Now on to reports of apparently rampant grift inside the Trump White House, touching on everything from tech to foreign policy. Among the new revelations, the New York Times reporting that tech billionaire David Sacks, the administration's so-called AI czar, is setting policies that could potentially benefit him personally. According to a Times analysis of his financial disclosures, Sacks has, quote, 708 tech investments, including at least 449 stakes in companies with ties to artificial intelligence that could be aided directly or indirectly by his policies. There's also new reporting on Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who is now leading peace talks with Russia. But according to the Wall Street Journal, Witkoff's negotiations have involved a, quote, blurring of business and geopolitics, as key presidential advisors see an opportunity for American investors to snap up lucrative deals in a new post-war Russia and become the commercial guarantors of peace. The journal goes on to quote, a cast of businessmen close to the Trump administration have been looking to position themselves as new economic links between the United States and...
Let's start with the one thing everybody's arguing about and nobody's really explaining. No, Donald Trump does not currently have every dollar he owns frozen by the Supreme Court. That's not where we are. But the fact that so many people hear a headline like nationwide asset freeze and instantly think, yeah, that sounds possible, tells you how far this has gone, how close his behavior has pushed us to a point where a step that extreme doesn't feel unthinkable anymore. And that's the story I want to walk through with you tonight. Not a fantasy, not clickbait, but the very real legal path that got us here. What courts have already done, and what it says about power, money, and whether the rule of law still means anything in the United States. Because at the center of all of this is a simple question. Are we still a country where the law can touch someone like Donald Trump? Or has he managed to put himself permanently above it? To answer that, we've got to back up to New York, to a courtroom where a civil fraud case ripped the mask off Trump's business image. A judge didn't just say, something looks off. He ruled that Trump and his companies systematically lied about the value of their assets for years. We're talking about financial statements that turned reality into fiction. An apartment that magically became 3 times its real size on paper. A private club valued far beyond what any independent appraiser saw. Golf courses and buildings treated like props in a branding exercise instead of real properties that needed honest numbers.
Unfortunately, it's not in person like a couple of weeks ago. It was deeply disturbing. I think, frankly, I cannot think of a more chaotic negotiation process in any period in our history. But more than the chaos, because this has been fits and starts, Trump's attention for moments, then he gets sidetracked or thinks it's too.
This wasn't one typo or one aggressive estimate. It was a pattern, a system, a way of doing business where the truth was optional as long as the number looked big and shiny and helped Trump get what he wanted. And the reason that matters isn't just moral, it's practical. Banks, insurers, lenders, they rely on those numbers. When you walk into a bank and ask for a loan, you don't get to say, well, in my heart, my house is worth 5 times more. You don't get to inflate your income just because it makes you look successful. That's fraud. For normal people, that's the end of the conversation. You lie like that, you're in serious trouble. For decades, Trump built a brand on being the exception to that rule. He wrote books about the art of the deal. He bragged on TV that he was really rich. He literally rode down a gold escalator to announce his campaign. The entire image was, I'm too rich, too powerful, too big to fail. You can't buy me. I'm the guy who does the buying. And then, in this civil fraud case, that entire mythology ran into something bigger. A court that could subpoena documents, question witnesses under oath, and look at the numbers behind the branding. Now, here's where this connects directly to the idea of an asset freeze. When you lose a civil case like that, and a judge orders you to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, the story doesn't end with a press conference. If you want to appeal, you almost always have to post a bond, basically a guarantee that says, if I lose the appeal, the money will be there. For Trump, we're talking roughly $500 million once you include interest and penalties. And suddenly, the guy who spent years telling crowds he's a billionaire's billionaire runs into a hard wall. His own lawyers go into court and say, we can't do it. We can't raise that bond. It's practically impossible. Think about what that means. If he actually had the kind of liquid wealth he's claimed, not just assets on paper, but accessible money, this wouldn't be impossible. Painful, maybe. Annoying, sure, but not impossible. You sell some things, you borrow against others. You get a partner. That's what real billionaires do when they're in a legal corner. Instead, Trump's legal team is basically waving a white flag on his finances. Not his polls, not his rally crowds, his money. They're telling the court, we don't have that kind of cash in reach. We're heavily leveraged. Everything's tied up. We can't back up the image with a bond. And judges notice that because, from the court's point of view, this is exactly the moment where someone like Trump might start playing games, moving money into shell companies, shifting properties into relatives' names, parking assets overseas, trying to make sure that by the time the bill comes due, there's nothing left to collect. That is precisely why asset freezes exist. Now, in this particular case, an appeals court stepped in and gave Trump a break. It cut the bond amount down to a much smaller figure and bought him time. Later, another panel went even further and wiped out the massive penalty altogether. On paper, that looks like a huge win for Trump, but zoom out, because what those judges couldn't wipe out is the paper trail. Years of inflated statements, deceptive valuations, and a business model built on bending reality. They didn't magically turn him into an honest broker. They didn't erase the fact that his own lawyers were standing in front of a court saying, we can't cover this. What they did do, intentionally or not, is highlight one of the central tensions in this story. When you are powerful, rich, and politically connected, you get chances regular people don't get. You get extra time, reduced penalties, creative workarounds, lifelines. When you're not, you miss one mortgage payment and the bank doesn't ask for your opinion on the matter. And that's where the fear, and in some circles, the fantasy of a nationwide asset freeze comes in. Because for a lot of Americans, especially people who support democracy and believe in rule of law, there's this feeling building up. If this level of fraud, manipulation, and abuse doesn't bring real consequences, what will? They're looking at a man who has been found to have committed civil fraud, tried to delay, minimize, or avoid consequences at every step, built a political brand on being untouchable, and they're asking, at what point does the system stop getting breaks and start acting like it would with anyone else? Now take that frustration and put it next to another piece of this story. While Trump is fighting like hell to protect his own wealth, he's also using government power to go after the very people who exposed his behavior. Look at New York Attorney General Letitia James. She brought the civil fraud case that stripped away the myth of Trump's financial genius. She's been called every name in the book by Trump and his allies. And in the background, you've got Trump's Justice Department pushing a mortgage case that multiple juries and judges have treated as flimsy and politically driven. So on one side, Trump wants the courts to go soft on him, reduce his burden, cut his penalties, trust his numbers, give him time. On the other side, he wants the justice system to go hard on his critics, investigate them, prosecute them, bleed them dry in legal fees, stain their reputations. That is not equal justice under law. That is power trying to use the law as a weapon on one end and a shield on the other. And if you've noticed, every time the law gets close to him, the script is always the same. The judge is corrupt. The prosecutor is radical. The case is rigged. The media reporting on it is fake news. The entire system, from career civil servants to independent prosecutors, is suddenly a deep state conspiracy. It's not a legal defense. It's a political strategy. The goal is to make you so angry at a system that you never read the documents. You never look at the numbers. You never ask why his own team keeps admitting in court that he can't back up his image with actual money. Because if you did, the story starts to look a lot less like a martyr being persecuted and a lot more like a man who spent his life bending rules and is finally running out of space to move. Let's talk more about asset freezes for a second, in plain language. An asset freeze isn't just you can't buy a new yacht. It's not about punishing someone's lifestyle choices. A true, sweeping asset freeze means you can't sell key properties, you can't refinance them, you can't move them into new companies or park them under your kids' names. You can't use them as collateral to get fresh loans. Business bank accounts get locked, so you may not be able to pay staff, contractors, or vendors. It's like hitting pause on someone's entire financial life. The assets still exist on paper, but they're frozen in place, locked behind legal glass until the court's done. It's the kind of tool courts usually reserve for serious situations, organized crime bosses trying to hide their money, major corporate fraud cases where executives might shuffle funds overseas, international money laundering schemes, not former presidents of the United States. The fact that people can even picture Donald Trump in that category tells you a lot about how he's chosen to live and operate. Now here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Who else gets hit when the system has to use tools that extreme? Think about the workers at Trump's hotels, golf courses, and clubs. People cleaning rooms, washing dishes, mowing fairways, working front desks, serving food. They didn't approve a single fraudulent loan application. They didn't inflate a single property value. They just took a job. If a broad freeze ever truly hit and business accounts got locked, those workers would feel it almost immediately. Late paychecks, canceled schedules, layoffs. Same for small businesses that serve Trump properties, laundry services, local suppliers, security contractors. They're not the ones who doctored financial statements, but they'd be the first to feel the shock. When someone at the top treats the law like a game, the fallout always rolls downhill. That is one of the reasons why early, steady accountability matters so much, so we don't end up in crisis mode, making extreme moves that hurt a huge circle of people who did nothing wrong. And that brings us to something courts have done already, putting guardrails around Trump's businesses. In New York, judges didn't just wag a finger. They brought in an independent monitor, someone whose job it is to look at what the Trump organization is doing in real time and flag suspicious moves. That's a big deal. Companies don't get monitored like that because everything's fine. They get monitored because a court has decided. We don't trust that you'll obey the rules on your own. That's what happens when there's a pattern of lying, evasion, and creative bookkeeping. The system moves closer. It takes away some freedom to move money in the dark. That's accountability. It's not as dramatic as marshals seizing buildings. It doesn't create viral images. But honestly, that's what a healthy rule of law system should look like. Constant, visible, boring pressure that says, you can still run a business, but you're not doing it in the shadows anymore. So let's zoom out even more. This is not just a story about Trump's bank accounts. This is a story about what we think law and order actually means in a democracy. For years, Trump and the MAGA movement have tried to redefine law and order as crack down on protesters, immigrants, and people we don't like, while treating white-collar crime, financial fraud, and abuse of office as minor nuisances that should be handled quietly, if at all. But real law and order is boringly consistent. It doesn't care if the person lying on a form is a single mom applying for benefits or a billionaire applying for a 9-figure loan. It doesn't change its standards because the defendant has a private jet, a cable show, or a loyal base of voters. If anything, a functioning democracy expects more honesty from the powerful, not less, because their lies are bigger lies. Their fraud has bigger consequences. Their abuses ripple farther. And we're not the only country that's had to deal with this. Look around the world. Former presidents in South Korea, prime ministers in Israel, leaders in Latin America, oligarchs in Europe, many have faced prosecution, massive fines, and jail time when courts found they crossed the line. Do their supporters scream that it's political? Of course. Power never goes quietly. There are always headlines about witch hunts and conspiracies. There are always pundits willing to say, this is chaos, this is too much, we should just move on. But underneath all the noise, something important happens. The system proves that it is bigger than one person, bigger than one party, bigger than one cult of personality. The law outlasts the leader. And that's really what's at stake here, under all the legal jargon, all the headlines, and all the social media spin. So where are we right now, in this exact moment? We're in a country where a former president has been found to have committed civil fraud. He narrowly avoided catastrophic immediate financial consequences through appeals and aggressive lawyering. Courts have already stepped in to monitor his businesses because they simply don't trust him to play by the rules. He's using the witch hunt narrative to keep his base loyal, to delegitimize every institution that ever says no to him, and to shield himself politically from the damage those legal findings should cause. At the same time, many of the people and institutions that tried to hold him accountable, from attorneys general to career lawyers to whistleblowers, are dealing with the backlash. Smear campaigns, threats, politically motivated investigations. This is not an academic debate. It's a live test. Can a democracy put real legal pressure on someone like Donald Trump without collapsing into pure political revenge on both sides? Can we distinguish between accountability based on documents, testimony, and rulings, and retaliation based on hurt egos and political fear? And that's where you and I come in. Because this isn't just about what judges write in opinions. It's about the story the public chooses to believe. One story says Trump is a victim. Every case against him is fake. Every judge is corrupt. Every reporter is lying. And the only truth comes from Trump himself and the people who praise him. That story leads to one place: a world where no evidence matters, no court matters, no institution matters, only loyalty does. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism with better branding. The other story says Trump is a citizen, a powerful one, a noisy one, a famous one, but still a citizen. And in a real democracy, citizens are accountable, even presidents, even billionaires, even reality TV stars turned politicians. That story doesn't ask you to love the prosecutors, worship the judges, or trust every headline. It just asks you to look at the facts, case by case, and ask, if a regular person did this, what would happen? So when people throw around phrases like nationwide asset freeze, here's how I think we should hear it. Not as a fantasy of vengeance, not as a guarantee of what will happen, but as a reminder of what should always be on the table in a real rule of law system. If you commit fraud on a massive scale, if you lie to banks and insurers, if you build your empire on deception, then yes, courts should have the power to lock down your assets until justice is done. Not because your name is Trump, but because your behavior matches what the law was written to prevent. The real question isn't, will they freeze every dollar he owns? The real question is, are we still willing to live in a country where they could, where the law is still strong enough and independent enough to treat someone like Donald Trump the same way it would treat anyone else who did what he did? That's the test in front of us. Not just for Trump, for the system itself, for us. Do we want to be the kind of democracy where power writes its own rules? or the kind where even the most powerful man in the room has to read the same laws as the rest of us. Because in the end, this isn't just the story of Trump's assets. It's the story of whether "no one is above the law" is still a sentence we say because we mean it, or just something we put on posters when it's convenient.